Most people believe that power is something held in the hands, in the title, or in the bank account. But power, in its most primal and cognitive form, is the ability to project one's internal reality into the external world. It is the bridge between a thought and its expression. We are often told that silence is a virtue, a sign of discipline or strategic restraint. However, there is a profound psychological distinction between the silence of the hunter and the silence of the prey. When you have a thought, an observation, or a conviction, and you consciously choose to suppress it because of a perceived social threat, you are not being polite. You are performing a micro-lobotomy on your own agency. This is the moment the internal hierarchy begins to shift. Every time a thought is stifled before it reaches the vocal cords, a signal is sent back to the brain's executive centers. That signal does not say, "We are being smart." It says, "My internal reality is less valid than the external pressure." This is the beginning of the silent surrender, a process where power is not stolen by others, but systematically dismantled from within. To understand why we stop speaking, we must look at the architecture of inhibition. The human brain is a prediction machine, constantly weighing the metabolic cost of an action against its potential reward. When you consider speaking a truth that might disrupt a social hierarchy, your prefrontal cortex enters a high-stakes calculation. It gauges social friction. If the amygdala senses even a trace of potential isolation or conflict, it triggers a surge of cortisol. This is not just a feeling of nervousness, it is a biological command to prioritize safety over truth. We normalize this process by calling it professionalism or discretion. But neurologically, you are training your brain to prioritize the perceived emotional state of others over your own cognitive clarity. Over time, this becomes a default setting. The neural pathways associated with self-expression begin to weaken, while the pathways for inhibitory control become reinforced and hypersensitive. You are building a cage bar by bar and calling it a fortress. The act of not saying what you think is not a passive state. It is an active, metabolically expensive operation. When you hold a thought in your working memory while simultaneously projecting a socially acceptable persona, you are forcing your brain to run two competing operating systems at once. Cognitive psychologists call this monitoring. It consumes an immense amount of glucose and mental bandwidth. This is why, after a day of self-censorship, of biting your tongue in meetings, or carefully auditing your words with peers, you feel an inexplicable exhaustion. This is not physical fatigue, it is the depletion of executive function. Because your energy is spent on not saying, you have nothing left for doing or creating. The filter you built to protect your position in the hierarchy is the very thing draining your ability to lead within it. The most dangerous consequence of self-censorship is not how others see you, but how you begin to see yourself. Language is not just a tool for communication, it is the structure of thought itself. When you stop articulating your thoughts to the world, your internal monologue loses precision. Observations that are never spoken never have to withstand scrutiny. They remain vague, incomplete, and untested. Slowly, the internal voice that defines who you are begins to erode. You lose the ability to distinguish between what you truly believe and the mask you have learned to wear. This cognitive dissonance is eventually resolved by the brain in the most efficient way possible. It deletes the conflicting thought. If you never say what you think, your brain eventually decides that what you think does not matter. Power is not only about action, it is about signaling. Human beings are biologically attuned to signs of internal alignment. When a person speaks from a place of coherence, their voice, Posture and timing convey an honesty signal that others interpret as authority. When you censor yourself, that signal disappears. People may not consciously notice what is missing, but their nervous systems detect the absence. Hesitation, overcalibration of language, and a lack of vocal commitment are interpreted as submission. In any hierarchy, this void is quickly filled by those willing to speak, regardless of the quality of their ideas. By remaining silent, you are not staying neutral, you are signaling that you will not defend your cognitive territory. Eventually, the habit of self-censorship reaches its logical conclusion, the disappearance of the self. Psychology refers to this as the dissolution of agency. You become so focused on what is safe to say that original thought begins to fade. Your mind turns into a mirror, reflecting back whatever it believes the environment wants to hear. A person who cannot express their thoughts cannot sustain a stable identity because identity is built on boundaries. When you stop rejecting what is false or misaligned, those boundaries dissolve. Control no longer needs to be applied externally. You begin enforcing it yourself. You become predictable, replaceable, and easy to manage. You are no longer being controlled by the system. You are maintaining the system on its behalf. There is often a moment when the illusion of safety collapses. Despite your silence, your restraint, and your careful navigation, you realize you are still vulnerable. Systems do not protect those who do not assert themselves. In fact, they often discard them first, precisely because they have demonstrated that they will not resist. This is the central miscalculation of self-censorship. You gave up power to purchase security, only to discover that power was the only thing that ever made you secure. The collapse is not dramatic. It is a quiet realization that the protection you thought you earned never actually existed. Power is rarely lost in a single event. It leaks away, gradually, every time silence is chosen over friction. The moment you stop saying what you think, the mechanism that allows you to exist as an independent cognitive entity begins to shut down. What remains is a quiet life, perhaps, but one lived inside the boundaries set by others. The brain, conditioned to suppress rather than assert, eventually settles into passivity. At that point, silence is no longer a strategy. It is no longer even a choice. It becomes an identity. And most people never notice when that transformation is complete. Self-censorship rarely feels like a decision. It feels like adaptation, like intelligence, like survival. And that's precisely why it works so well. Power doesn't disappear in moments of conflict. It erodes quietly, every time a thought is suppressed before it's expressed. If this analysis resonated with you, it's because you've seen this process from the inside. If you want to continue understanding how cognition, behavior, and invisible systems shape authority and control, subscribe to the channel. These mechanisms only remain powerful when they're unnamed.